Good day, everyone. I'm John, your moderator for this webinar on the behalf of the organizer company called Conference Panel. I welcome everyone for today's webinar, which is called Violence at Work from Disgruntled Employee and Domestic Violence to Mass Murder. So now I would like to introduce our presenter for today, Dr. Susan Strauss. Dr. Susan Strauss is a national and international consultant speaker and trainer in organizational effectiveness and management development. She has established numerous onboarding new employee-oriented program for both small and large organizations. So now I would like to hand over the floor back to our speaker. Over to you, Susan.
Okay, well, thank you very much, John, and greetings, everybody, from Minnesota. So we'll be talking about an issue, of course, that is gaining great momentum. And let's look at the objectives for today. We're going to define what exactly do we mean by workplace violence anyway, and what are some of the high-risk industries for violence? We'll examine the extent of workplace violence, as well as something called parking lot gun laws. We'll list 10 tips to de-escalate an angry person, to recognize the level of violence, and what the appropriate response is. Okay, we'll review workplace violence laws and regulations, and we'll outline some prevention and intervention strategies. So definitions of workplace violence. Let's take a look at those. There is great similarity among the definitions of workplace violence. And as you read through these, while the words bullying do not exist, they are implying that bullying could be included here. And you'll also notice that they are indicating harassment. So when you think about some of the quote-unquote bullying behavior and harassment of protected classes based on federal, state, and city law, those do fall under the umbrella of workplace violence. So think about this. OSHA identifies which industry as having 3 times the higher risk of violence than any other industry. Well, they all are at high risk, but the one that is at highest risk is healthcare, 3 times more likely than private industries. And then it's social service is high risk. Any late night retail, and this would make sense, right? I have a friend who retired and decided just for fun, they were looking for somebody to work in a alcohol establishment, a store, and he thought, oh, that might be kind of fun to meet all the neighbors. Well, he worked there for, I don't know, maybe 2 years, and twice he was held up at gunpoint. He quit. And then these industries are, if you work in them, also much more likely to receive inspections from OSHA. So do not ever threaten or argue or contradict or challenge or command them, shame them, or show disrespect. You want to make sure that you are not the hero, and you don't ever make promises you cannot keep, and don't make physical contact with them. So here's a question for you. Do you think domestic violence is a leading cause of violence in the workplace? What do you think? It is. It is the leading cause of violence in the workplace. 1 in 5 of your employees is a victim of domestic violence. That's a ton. 21% of employees indicate in research that they're victims of domestic violence. 75% of the perpetrators, in other words, the violent person, which is usually, not always, male, uses the workplace as their venue so that they can harass or intimidate, stalk, express their anger, or even injure their victim, and in some cases kill them. It costs a ton of money, as you can see, $2 billion a year. That's in healthcare costs for the victim, as well as loss of productivity. And it costs employers roughly, now this is around $4 billion a year. That's total now. That includes not only productivity in healthcare, but an increase in insurance and orders of protection. So what are you going to do to prevent it? And then consider these additional steps. Escort this person to the parking lot. and maybe provide parking space that would be closer to the building and flexible work hours. Take their name off the office directory. Maybe you could start screening calls and change the employee's work email address. So what are some of the tips for your parking lot and gun policies? So what measures are you going to use to control any access to parking lots where you can store firearms? And if it is permitted by state laws, then what are you going to do to implement a type of, firearms registration process, I guess is what you could call it. And again, review your state laws and then draft a gun policy, all right, keeping in mind safety, and then conspicuously post your gun policy. Make sure that you evaluate if you are in compliance with OSHA. So let's take a look at the Occupational Safety and Health Act. So it requires protection against workplace violence hazards. There is a tort liability. Now, this is a civil rights action. If there is negligent hiring, supervision, training, and retention of violent people. Do you have a written policy against workplace violence? Is this actively communicated to all employees? In other words, it's not just something that you email to everyone and say, let us know that you've read this and sign off. We know how that goes. And do you have an employee assistance program? Now, there's general security measures that they're going to look at. Now, here is a checklist for you to go through after the webinar on how to mitigate, and you could use this as a springboard in designing your goals and objectives. Now, you right here could have 3 goals. The objectives need to be written differently because they're not SMART, but it gives you a good starting takeoff. So in summary then, we have to realize that violence is a very real and present danger, especially in today's environment. Okay, well, listen, first of all, everybody, thank you so much for joining us. I hope that this was helpful for you. And I would like for you to think about this webinar as a beginning point for your organization, a springboard, not only for discussion in your workplace, but to conduct violence in the workplace training as well. Bye-bye, and thank you, John, as well, for the opportunity.